The clock had just struck midnight when my parents decided to remind me what family really meant to them. My son Noah and I stood shivering on their front porch, clutching a small overnight bag, because we had come for what I thought would be one safe night under a roof that was supposed to feel like home. The city was colder than usual, a biting wind cutting through Noah's thin hoodie. He rubbed his little eyes, half asleep, clutching his worn-out stuffed bear. I had begged them earlier that evening to let us stay just one night because my landlord had suddenly locked us out, claiming he needed urgent repairs, and the nearest motel was booked. My father's voice came from behind the screen door, cold and dripping with disgust. "We're not running a shelter for strays," he barked, glaring at me like I was a stranger who'd just trespassed. My mother leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed, a smirk twisting her face. "You made your bed, sweetheart. Lie in it. Don't drag your mistakes to our doorstep. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video?" I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's just one night," I whispered, desperation leaking into every word. "Noah needs sleep. He's exhausted, please." That's when my father yanked the door open fully, his face a mask of contempt. He glanced down at my son, a 6-year-old boy barely keeping his eyes open, and spat out words that froze my blood. "Begging is all you're good for. Maybe you should teach your kid how to do it properly since you're both so pathetic." I flinched like he'd struck me. My hands shook as I pulled Noah closer, shielding him from the venom in their voices. "Dad, he's just a child." But before I could finish, my sister Claire appeared behind them, holding a mug of tea, grinning like this was entertainment. "This is priceless," she said with a laugh, taking a sip. "Your life's a train wreck, and you're dragging that poor boy with you. Honestly, I wouldn't let you in either." My father stepped out, shoved the overnight bag I had set on the porch back toward me with his foot, and hissed, "Street's open, isn't it? If you can't stand on your own 2 feet, maybe you and your brat deserve the cold." Then he slammed the door so hard it rattled the windows. Noah's little body trembled in my arms, his tears soaking my shirt as he whispered, "Mommy, what did we do wrong?" That question sliced through me deeper than any insult ever could. I knelt in the dark, hugging him tight, fighting back my own sobs because I couldn't let him see me break. "Nothing, baby," I whispered fiercely. "You did nothing wrong. They're the ones who don't know what love is." We sat on the curb for hours, the street lamps buzzing above us, every minute feeling like an eternity. Cars drove by without stopping. My phone had no messages, no one coming to help. The cold seeped into my bones, my mind swirling with memories, every slap, every cruel word growing up, every time they called me useless while I cooked their dinners, cleaned their house, tried so hard to earn even a scrap of affection, and now they had taken that cruelty and aimed it at my child. By dawn, I had made a silent vow. The days of begging them to see my worth were over. They had stripped me of dignity my whole life, laughed at my pain, and thrown my son onto the street like he was trash. One day soon, I would take everything they clung to, the comfort of their warm house, the false power they held over me, the smug looks they shared when they thought they'd won, and I would make them crawl for a roof over their heads, just like they forced my child to do. As I watched the first rays of sun stretch across the empty road, I kissed Noah's forehead, tears drying on my cheeks. "Mommy's got you now," I whispered, "and one day they'll understand what they did to us. One day they'll know what it's like to beg." The promise burned in my chest like fire. This time I wasn't just a daughter they could break. I was a mother who would make sure they were left with nothing but the same cold, merciless darkness they had handed to us that night. The memory of that night clung to me like smoke, no matter how many days passed. Even when Noah finally fell asleep in the cramped room we rented from a kind stranger a week later, I lay awake listening to his soft breathing, my heart pounding with a mixture of grief, rage, and something new, a resolve so sharp it could cut through stone. For years I had swallowed their cruelty. I had smiled through insults, endured their laughter when I cried, told myself they were still my parents, my family, and family was supposed to mean something. but standing on that curb at midnight with my son's small hand clutching mine, listening to his quiet, terrified sobs while my parents slept comfortably inside their house, something inside me had died that night, and something else had been born. I didn't want an apology anymore. I didn't even want love from them anymore. What I wanted was to watch the smug certainty melt off their faces. I wanted to take that house, the one they lorded over everyone, the symbol of their power and superiority, and turn it into a place they hated, a place that made them shiver the way Noah and I had on the street. They'd made my son beg for a roof. One day they would beg for one too. The first step was silence. I cut off every line of contact. Not a single call answered, not a single text replied to. They tried to control me with guilt their whole lives, and I knew that silence would feel like a crack forming in their foundation. At first, I imagined them gloating, telling people how they had taught me a lesson. But time is a funny thing. It turns smugness into doubt when the target doesn't come crawling back. While they sat smug in their house, I started digging into everything that made their life comfortable. My father's social clubs where he bragged about being a strong provider. My mother's reputation as the backbone of the family, loved by her church group and neighbors. I didn't scream or gossip. I simply found quiet ways to pull at the threads they'd spent decades weaving. I made sure their neighbors overheard the truth about how they threw their daughter and grandson onto the street at midnight. I didn't have to embellish anything. Just the bare facts were enough to make jaws drop and friendships cool. The whispers started spreading. What kind of grandparents would do that to a 6-year-old? But I knew my parents. Reputation wasn't enough for them. They had always fed off control. Control over me, over Claire, over every holiday dinner and family memory. They believed the house they owned was their fortress, their throne. So I started with the house. I learned every vulnerability about it, how the bills were barely being paid since my father's business had started slowing down, how my mother had maxed out credit cards to keep up appearances, how they had refinanced just months before that night. Quietly, I found every piece of leverage I needed, not to buy it, not to sell it, but to make it unstable. It wasn't about throwing them out immediately. That would be too merciful. My goal was to make their comfort crumble beneath them, inch by inch, until the day came when their own pride turned to desperation and they had to crawl for shelter just like they made my boy do. I started planting seeds of doubt in the right ears, hints that the house was built on debt, that my parents weren't as untouchable as they claimed. Rumors reached the banks they owed, pressure started building, cracks forming where they thought they were strongest. And every night I lay beside Noah, kissing his forehead, promising him softly, "One day, baby, they'll understand what it feels like to be left in the dark. They'll stand in the cold just like we did, and no one will open the door for them either." My revenge wouldn't be quick. It wouldn't be loud. It would be slow, deliberate, and unforgettable. And when it came, they would know what it meant to beg. Not for love, but for a roof, for warmth, for mercy. Exactly like they made us. Months passed, but the promise I'd made that night on the cold curb never faded. Every time I tucked Noah in, every time his small voice asked, "Mommy, why didn't Grandma love us?" the fire in my chest burned hotter. My parents had spent their whole lives teaching me that love was conditional, that safety had to be begged for, that I was only worth whatever crumbs they decided to throw my way. That night, they extended that lesson to my son, and they thought they could just go on sipping wine in their warm house, laughing with my sister, acting like nothing happened. No, not this time. By now, the seeds I'd planted were roots curling under their foundation. Their circle of friends was thinning. People who once praised my parents now looked away, disgusted by the truth that they could no longer hide. The whispers of what they'd done followed them everywhere. Church, grocery stores, their precious neighborhood barbecues. They hated it, but it was just the start. I had learned every weakness in their lives. My father had refinanced the house to help Claire with her debts years ago. He'd told everyone it was a smart investment, but really, they were one bad month away from losing everything. My mother's credit was tied to bills stacked so high it was a wonder they hadn't already drowned in them. They had built their kingdom on borrowed bricks. I began making the cracks wider. Quietly, deliberately, I let certain truths find their way to their lenders. Not lies, truths. Records of missed payments, proof of extravagant spending when they were supposed to be struggling. Their house, the house they weaponized against me, the one they refused to let my son sleep in for even a night, was suddenly a liability. The pressure came fast, calls from the bank, letters piling up, deadlines they couldn't meet. Weeks later, I parked across the street late one evening, Noah asleep in the back seat, and watched my father pacing the porch, phone to his ear, his once booming voice cracked and desperate. My mother sat on the steps, crying into her hands. Claire wasn't there. Of course she wasn't. When the money dried up, so did her loyalty. But it still wasn't enough. They needed to feel it. Not just the fear of losing their comfort, but the cold, gnawing reality of being out in the world with no one willing to take them in. They needed to taste the same humiliation they'd forced on my little boy. So, when the eviction notice finally came, I made sure it stuck. Their last attempt to crawl out of the hole failed because every single friend they'd once bragged about had turned their backs. The people they mocked me for not being good enough for now wanted nothing to do with them. Their perfect reputation had rotted away, leaving them friendless, unwanted, despised. The night they were forced out, I was there, standing under the streetlight, watching them drag suitcases down the driveway of the house they thought would always be theirs. My father spotted me first. The man who once told me, begging is all you're good for, now had that same desperation in his eyes. My mother, shivering in the cold, looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. They approached slowly, pride clinging to them like a dying breath. We just need a place to stay, my mother whispered, her voice brittle. My father couldn't meet my eyes. For a moment, I thought of Noah's trembling little hands that night, the way he'd asked me what we did wrong, the fear in his voice as he begged for warmth his grandparents had denied him. The memory hit me like a punch. I stepped forward, staring them down, every ounce of pain they'd caused me and my son boiling to the surface. "You remember midnight?" I asked quietly. My father blinked, confused. My voice sharpened like glass. "You remember throwing my son onto the street, calling us beggars while you laughed? You remember telling me the street was open? Well, it still is." My mother's lips trembled. "We were wrong," she croaked. "We didn't mean it." "Wrong doesn't keep a child warm," I spat. "Wrong doesn't erase the sound of his crying that night. You wanted us to beg? Now it's your turn. Crawl for it." They stared at me, stunned, shame washing over their faces. My father opened his mouth, but no words came out. I took Noah's small hand, he had woken and was watching quietly from the car, and turned my back on them. "We'll sleep just fine tonight," I said over my shoulder, "because I learned we don't need you. I hope the street feels familiar." And with that, I walked away, Noah's little fingers gripping mine, his head resting against my arm as if a weight had lifted from both of us. My parents stood there under the streetlight, homeless, powerless, their pride shattered, their comfort stripped bare. For years, they had made me crawl, beg, endure their cruelty in silence. That night, they finally learned what it was like to be thrown into the cold, desperate for mercy from someone who had none left to give. The difference was, I hadn't turned them into beggars. They had done it to themselves. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are